This is the eLearn podcast. If you're passionate about the future of learning, you're in the right place. The expert guests on this show provide insights into the latest strategies, practices, and technologies for creating killer online learning outcomes. My name's Laddick, and I'm your host from OpenLMS. The eLearn podcast is sponsored by eLearn Magazine, your go-to resource for all things online learning. Click-by-click how-to articles, the latest in EdTech, a spotlight on successful outcomes and trends in the marketplace. Subscribe today and never miss a post at elearnmagazine.com. And OpenLMS, a company leveraging open source software to deliver a highly effective, customized, and engaging learning experience for schools, universities, companies, and governments around the world since 2005. Learn more at openlms.net. Hi there, I'm Laddick. This episode is part of a live, real-time series that I recorded at the 2022 EDUCAUSE conference in Denver, Colorado. In this conversation, I speak with Victoria Getis and Jay Gladden about what it means to have a responsive, student-centered IT support at some of the world's largest campuses. And just a quick reminder, you can make sure to never miss an episode of the podcast by subscribing at elearnmagazine.com. Now, I give you Victoria and Jay.
We are here with Victoria Getis and Jay Gladden. Are you both at the same institution?
No.
No, okay, fantastic.
I'm at Northwestern University.
So why don't you introduce yourself, Victoria?
I'm at Northwestern University. I'm the Director of Teaching and Learning Technologies in Northwestern IT.
Okay, excellent. And Jay?
Associate Vice President for Learning Technologies for Indiana University.
Wow, all right. We got to talk to Phil. He's in Indiana.
That's what I hear. That's what I hear.
So you had a panel, a presentation this morning at 8 a.m. in the snow and sleet. People came. Tell me about, my understanding was that it was going to be how do we create a student-centered support, IT system. But you said it actually turned out to be more about how do we support faculty. Why don't you just kind of walk me through what it is that you put on the table?
Sure. So we had a group of four of us from other Big Ten institutions. So Indiana, Michigan State, Northwestern, and Rutgers were the schools represented. So schools that are big, small, urban, less urban, and so forth. And we were really talking about sort of where are we now in terms of the changes that have been wrought by the pandemic. What do we see coming, and are we anywhere near a next normal?
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And the answer would be no.
No, really?
Think so.
Really? People don't think so?
Oh, not yet.
Yeah, and I think particularly, the theme is how do we best support students. I think a lot of our work is through faculty. And I think faculty are really struggling with how do we best do that? Because the media have proliferated, the modes of delivery have proliferated. Students have realized that flexibility is a thing, that, hey, I like captioning on my lectures, I like recorded lectures. Mm-hmm. And that's just a lot more to add on to the traditional faculty roles. We talk about that.
Yeah, and one of the things that we've seen at all of our institutions is this uptick in the number of students needing accommodations through their offices of disability services.
Okay.
And, this sounds terrible, but for years, those offices and those students were asking us, can you record all the lectures, please? Can you caption all the lectures, please? And we would basically say, no. We didn't have the funding, we didn't have the personnel, we didn't have the technology. And then the pandemic hit, and we had all of those things.
Suddenly, oops, now we got it. Yeah.
Now we got it. And those students are saying, well, why did it take so long, and is this going to go away? They're really worried about that.
Mm-hmm. So when we think about, you just said that student support happens, did I get it correct, happens through faculty support. Does that sound right? So I almost feel like you've answered this question, but I want to kind of go down the rabbit hole a little further. You said technologies have proliferated, media modes, delivery modes have proliferated. What is if I'm in a Big Ten school, what does the typical professor profile look like in that regard in terms of, is it just sort of a mimicking of what you would see in any group of humans, that some people are super tech savvy and they're early adopters, some people are never going to adopt it and be like, no, heck no. What does that look like?
Yeah, I think you pretty much hit the nail on the head there. I think the difference these days is students are coming to universities having experienced a very standardized K-12 LMS experience, and they hit higher ed, and it's totally unstandardized. And so a lot of a first-year student feeling overwhelmed may be them figuring out where does their assignment live, when's something due, because it's not just very transparent for them. And that's one of the things we talked about too.
Why does that chaos exist? I guess we haven't lived in the United States for quite a while, so I don't know what's a typical K-12 like standardized experience look like that you would think.
So my daughter teaches 7th grade English in Virginia.
That sounds pretty standard.
It sounds very standard, and so she uses Canvas. And at the beginning of the school year, she was given her course sites, and they had a standard format and a standard look and feel. And if she wanted to change anything, she had to do it through the tech person. So they kept
what the standardization was through gatekeeping, essentially.
Exactly.
Okay.
So she can add content, but if she wanted to add like a whole new section of something, it had to sort of go through not an approval process, but something.
A process,
right? And so that's what our students are coming from, is something that's pretty standardized. And then they get to our institutions, and Professor X is doing it this way, Professor Y is doing it that way. And then, if you're in a lab course, you've got a lecture Canvas site or other LMS site, and then you've got one for the lab. And then you've got one for the support group that you're in for people in sciences,
right?
And then you've got another one attached to that class for some other group. You can have 4 different ways of getting around. It's really hard.
For someone, do you want to add on to that? Or?
No, I think it's just a really interesting phenomenon. The one that I just actually embarrassingly awoken to maybe a year ago. But I think it's a real pain point for our students.
Well, so again, sort of an innocent layman question from someone who doesn't manage it, isn't a CIO at a Big Ten school. Like, how did this wild, wild west happen? In terms of, it would seem to me that bigger university, more resources, someone would freak out and say, we've got to be able to control this somehow. But it seems like almost the opposite happened. Like what's I'm for someone who's kind of looking from the outside in, it would just seem like, how could you let this chaos proliferate?
Chaos is built into higher ed. Yeah. We cannot tell faculty what to do.
Interesting.
We have always been told in IT, we can't tell faculty what to do. We can give them tools, we can give them guidelines, we can give them best practices, but we can't tell them what to do. They are
they're the owner of their material and the delivery, and they're the expert.
Yes. Which is the way it should be. I mean, you don't want your information coming through only one standard pipeline. You wouldn't go to a class on design thinking and expect to have the same delivery and engagement that you would in a class on medieval literature, right?
Really, medieval literature is very famous. Now, this is the 4th time it's been brought up in the last 2 days. I love that one. Anyway.
Okay, well, I don't know why I came up with medieval literature, but you would want a different approach based on the topic and the experts.
Sure. Okay. So, out of your panel this morning, I'm assuming you didn't walk out of the room with everybody going, "Oh well, we're all just kind of screwed." That was good. Like, what kind of came of it? What questions were there? Is it? Are we still in the sort of let's form small groups and talk about it and see what bubbles up, or are there concrete solutions to go forward?
I think one of the key themes was just the notion that now more than ever we have to be out engaging with our stakeholders and utilizing all sorts of information that we have at our fingertips. So any sort of institutional research, whatever is talked about nationally, internationally in terms of teaching and learning. But then also really specific and focused conversations with faculty and students about their experiences. From my perspective, one of the things we're spending a lot of time talking about is how do we make things easier for faculty? Because maybe they might not present it that way, but when we present ideas that make things easier or take less time, they're very interested. And it makes sense because they're being asked to do more, so what can we help take off their plate? So that's one of the things from a technology perspective, we're focusing on how can we use technology to help with that, in that way.
Anything else that you want?
Yeah, one of the things that we didn't get a chance to explore this morning, but I sort of wish we had, was that, at least at my institution, my group has never had a better reputation on campus. And so we have this moment coming out of the pandemic shift where I think if we asked for big things, we might be able to.
Mm.
Are you seeing the same thing? Is that...
Yeah, I mean, I agree with the notion that I think there's a deeper appreciation for the work that we do. For example, we spun up, before the pandemic, we'd spun up a site called Keep Teaching.
Okay.
It was really a disaster preparedness exercise.
We
But
copied it.
it had all the resources, like basic resources one would need to flip a class from in-person to online. It took it was bad luck that we ended up having to use it so quickly. But I think people realize where those resources are coming from, and they value them. And also the technology, having relied on it so heavily. Like, there was a rumor floating around our campus that Zoom was going away. So part of what I do when I talk to faculty is just want to spell the rumor. We're the process of renewing Zoom, just because that is so integral to their workflow and their work and their teaching and learning.
So that's interesting that it's an emergency thing, but then dependency kind of is created, and then many of the conversations we've had, or I've had over the last day and a half here, have been around just sort of high flex, about the expectation that it's no longer in-person or hybrid. It's now, I'm going to kind of choose a la carte what I want to do. How is that affecting, your decision-making, your messaging? Hey, I mean, even just speak to how important is messaging? It sounds like you say you've got a moment right now. What are you going to do to flex the muscle? Like, and just say, hey, look, what are the big asks?
Yeah, you said high flex, and I thought, can I leave now?
I agree.
That's awesome.
It's really, really hard. It's really hard to do well. And
Do you have an essence? Because for me, and again, a layman question, it feels natural to me. But that just may be because I'm a tech savvy person who, is comfortable with ambiguity and thinking on the fly, right? What makes it hard, like especially in a large institution like the ones that you run?
so in my mind, high flex means that students can attend in person or remotely, and they can choose that at any time.
Extemporaneous, yeah, like whenever.
So, today I'm going to be remote. Today I'm going to be in person. And so what we're asking the instructor to do is basically design for both of those audiences, not know ahead of time what the balance is going to be, and if they're trying to create some kind of interactive activities for the class, figure out how to bridge that divide between the person and those who are online. So it's not like you're designing a brand new course, it's like you're designing 2.5 new courses.
Particularly the asynchronous component is expected with that as well.
Sure.
I think that eventually there'll be boundaries to the flexibility, and one way this may manifest is there'll just be different ways classes are offered, so that you won't have necessarily, you have a fully remote class that's asynchronous if that's what you want, and that fits better in your life and fits your schedule. Or you'll have a in-person class that has the option to have some hybrid elements where necessary, or maybe some hybrid days. The whole high flex comp is, particularly based on what Vicky just talked about, I think it's just too complex. And even the most flexible and adaptable instructor is going to struggle.
Does this, and especially as Big Ten institutions, are you or do you have the privilege of being connected to industry outside of higher ed who are struggling with the remote work problem? And are you hearing the same thing? And is it now an expectation that's bleeding out from graduates into the workforce saying, hey, I did it back there, how come I can't do it here, or vice versa? They're both laughing, by the way. They're both laughing at me.
I haven't heard that specific challenge, but I know.
I just put it on the table. That's me.
I know the. I think we're all trying to figure out what the workspace is and the level of presence required. I think that's happening
everywhere.
In all of our workspaces. I haven't heard that one. That'll be interesting to see. Is how does the flexibility that college students the last 3 years and moving forward have been afforded? Does that translate into expectation from workplace? Really interesting question. I don't have any way to.
I don't. Well, it's kind of funny because you just said that it's still just such early days. Even you were saying, Vicky, that we're not even at that new normal yet because the ground isn't even starting to settle yet. It's still very tumultuous, and I find it a really refreshing perspective from individuals such as yourself. Because my guess is that when we look out at a lot of these vendors, they're like, no, we already know what we're doing. We're going this direction, and you're like, actually, no. So.
Yeah, so one of the things that you have to remember is how quickly student culture changes. So the students are at the institution usually 4 years, maybe 5, right? And within that time period, a lot can change.
Mm-hmm.
I have an example from Northwestern where the student government decided that students shouldn't advertise their events by passing out paper flyers. They should only do it online as a method of sustainability.
Sure, yeah. Okay.
And by God, within a couple of years, there are no more people passing out flyers, and everything is online.
I feel like that's a part of my history that it's been torn.
It's
gone. The paper machine.
Absolutely, yeah.
Right, exactly. But for me, it's like this really good reminder that within 4 years, they change the student culture, and we've got a group of students who. Right now, the ones who are coming in had a year and a half to 2 years of disruption during their high school years, and we haven't settled down in their college years. And so, what's going to be that 4-year path for them, and then how are they changing the institution for people who are coming after them? One thing that we saw last year was that students were really struggling, and some of the faculty felt like it wasn't the first-year students, it was the second-year students who were having that much more trouble. And their theory was, well, they had not been well acculturated to the institution because when they started, they didn't have the upperclassmen there to show them this is how our institution works.
100%, yeah.
Yeah. So I started in the current role 14 months ago, and even during the pandemic, I oversaw undergraduate education at the IUPUI campus. And we were talking in early 21 just about the notion that the first-year students that just gone through, they're going to be first-year students again because they were very rarely on the campus. So I think Vicky's point's a really good one. And even within the students we have in the traditional age schema, forget about everyone else that is in higher ed. I mean, there's a lot of difference there for sure.
Oh boy, I don't know what they're gearing up for here, but it sounds big. So tell me about this moment that you wish that you had kind of had a little more space in your panel to talk about this morning, which is if you did want to flex and say, look, we've got a great moment here, what would be the things that you would put out there? Or, let me give you that moment to say, how do you use some of the cachet you have right now and the goodwill that's being given to your department?
I think it's a give and take situation. I think that making things easier for faculty is one thing. So that's going to be investing in tools and services, which will be expanding our areas, which we don't mind. I think that it's going to I think it's incumbent upon us to make digital accessibility absolutely fundamental to everything we do. And again, we're going to have to figure out a way to do that without increasing the burdens on our faculty too much. And so it's not just sort of like a thing, I think it's absolutely what we have to do. And then I think the third thing is that this is the moment if we want to say, look, we see the student body is changing, we see that the faculty need help, let's put all of our efforts into student success, making sure that students feel like they belong, they're included, and that they understand the tools that they have at the institution to further their education. And I mean, I think part of the reason we talk about faculty is because we don't actually really have support units for students. We have a help desk. But
interesting. What's the like? So
yeah, but we don't.
What does that look like? What's the difference? I guess
we do tons of outreach to faculty. We have symposium, we have talks, we have communities of practice. We don't do that with our students. We assume that they know what they're doing technologically.
Yeah, I completely agree. Another idea space I would think about as we look forward is video. If we think about how we all consume information these days, videos increasingly will continue to be an increasing part of what we do. Of course, with students, the social media platform changes like every 2 years, the preferred one. But, that's kind of how they want content.
Sure.
And so high level, professional, and then I'm going to add engaging video content, which could be meaning overlaying a couple of different tools. I think that's a space that we're going to be trying to figure out how to invest more in as we move forward. Because that can serve on-premise, can serve remote, can serve hybrid, and can be reused ultimately.
So is there any one, I'm trying to think of the feedback that you got during your presentation. Is there anything that stood out, or is there any other, unexpected question that you got, or maybe an experience or a challenge that someone said that you weren't expecting, or was it mostly people remember like, yep, we agree? And
There was one comment. That I really remember was a faculty member from one of the Minnesota state schools said, "We have some faculty who are saying, what do we have to spoon feed the students? They've sort of lost some of the sympathy and empathy that they have for the students. Not all faculty, but some of them. And I think that's a possibility at any campus. And so it might be part of our jobs to help smooth that over a little bit.
Yeah, I think the last 3 years have been hard on all of us. And, I think there was a lot of talk about supporting students rightfully so during the pandemic. I think, at least I've heard some faculty say a little bit about supporting faculty and staff and that as well. And I think what it speaks to is they're being asked to do more, and at the same time they have the same outside of work pressures that students do. And so I just think there's we're on the back end of whatever this thing is, and I think we've all changed, and we all have different preferences and needs, and I think that's part of what we're still thinking about.
Fantastic. Well, I'll tell you what, Victoria and Jay, thank you so much. I know we're on the sort of tail end of the conference here, so I really appreciate you coming over and taking time to speak with me about this really interesting conversation. And I'm really interested to find out what you guys do next in terms of flexing this muscle and whatnot. So thank you so much.
Pleasure.
Thank you for asking.
Thanks again for joining me for the eLearn podcast. Make sure you never miss an episode by subscribing wherever you listen to podcasts. Just push subscribe on your player right now. And remember, you can join the conversation live on YouTube, Facebook, and my LinkedIn feed every week. I hope to see you there. Thanks.